And Will is joining us today because he got kicked out of whatever class he was supposed to be in this morning. All right, let's pray and we'll get started. Father, thank you for another day. Thank you for your goodness, your faithfulness. Thank you for the joy of knowing the Lord Jesus, and being able to begin each day knowing that we are in your caring, loving, and secure hands. And I pray that you'd be honored as we dive a little more deeply into this discussion of honor shame cultures today, and help us to learn some things and to grow in our appreciation for the incredible diversity that exists in our world today. I pray in Jesus' name, amen. Come on in, Jules. Morning, Riley. Okay, so we're looking at that last section. I think everybody has that in your notes. If not, let me know and I'll get it to you, but this is the part that's, so you guys already know what goes in there, right? Pardon? Yep. Or you could put probably, guilt, innocence, any order, guilt, innocence, honor, shame, fear, power. And there is one clarification I'd like to make here. When it says anthropologists have reduced the cultures of the world to three basic types, I think we need to clarify that we're not just talking about a random way of reducing all of the cultures of the world. We're talking about a specific approach to analyzing cultures, which would be what? What do these three classifications really bring to the fore? What do they really emphasize about the cultures of the world?
How we interpret sin.
Right, how do we deal with the problem of sin and evil? We've mentioned that before, but when I went back and read that statement, I thought that's a little bit too general. And so that's just something that you always need to keep in mind. You can break down, analyze the cultures of the world in a number of ways, but there's always something driving that. And what's driving this classification is, what do we do about the problem of sin or evil or bad in the world? Okay. All right. So let's venture down a little bit on this. Second here. All right. And now, again, this part here is nothing new. Where can we expect to find these? The Western world, individualistic cultures with a strong sense of justice. You might be tempted to say, well, that's all the Western world. But do you remember a couple of exceptions where individualism would still be strong or that may not necessarily be in the Western world?
South Africa.
At least parts of South Africa. And Paul very helpfully drew our attention to the fact that that's, it wouldn't be all, but at least in parts of South Africa where the British influence has been really felt, you might find more of that type of thing. Mm-hmm. Right. And there are a few other pockets too. A place like Thailand, and some of those places we've studied so that's why it's not just the Western world, but primarily. Then honor shame, mostly Asian, Latin America, and collectivistic cultures. Not all collectivistic cultures are honor shame cultures, but collectivism plays a role in honor shame thinking. And I think that goes without saying. Because honor shame, well, we'll get to that in a minute. Honor shame, it is connected to collectivism. We'll come back to that. Okay, culture with a strong sense of community image. Fear, power. Whoops, sorry. Sub-Saharan Africa and parts of Latin America, and then any culture that would be dominated by animism. Is there any place in the world, any cluster in the world where you don't find animism? In some fashion. Yeah, and we actually didn't study that as a cluster. I don't know how many people live in Antarctica. Anybody want to, I'm curious, anybody want to Google that? Oh yeah, there's some people living there in, doing research or whatever. Anybody want to Google that and let us know? Yeah, Antarctica doesn't show up on our list of cultural clusters. The answer really is no. Any culture in the world is going to express some element of animism, okay? In fact, animism, you got a number there, James?
Like 4,000.
4,000, yeah. But most of them are, researchers working for some company or they've been, kicked out of their, have to find some place to go. 4,000 people. Yeah. When I was in Alaska several years ago, my wife and I went up there for a conference, and we stayed with a couple who spent 4 years of their lives on the other side, it was up on a part of Alaska that was way up, about as north as it gets, where you have the 24-hour sun basically, or almost, at certain times of the year. And they were describing for us what it was like to live in that kind of environment. I think I would just go nuts. They have to keep themselves busy doing things in order to, get through those times of intense dark. We know what it's like here just to go through January when it gets dark at 4:30 in the afternoon, and then doesn't get light till 8 or 8:30 the next morning. Anyway, but animism is sometimes called the global culture or something like that because it's present in some form anywhere you go in the world. Okay, and just to make sure we all are on the same page here, somebody give me a succinct definition of animism. If it's everywhere in the world, we probably should, I think you have concepts floating around in your minds, but try to crystallize it. What is animism? Yeah, go ahead. Okay, it does involve spirit worship. Mm-hmm. The spirit is one of the key words. There are societies where an awareness of an interaction with the spirit realm dominates. Okay, is present, and so. Do you remember reading? I think most of you have read the article, "The Flaw of the Excluded Middle." Do you remember that article? I know you've read a lot of stuff. Paul Hebert, he writes, in our culture, there's a dichotomy between the spiritual realm, spiritual matters, and then the material world. And science in this culture tends to concentrate only on this part down here. Science doesn't take seriously supernatural, religious, spiritual stuff, okay? But that is unique to the Western world. Most of the world sees a blend of those together, where the spirit realm is vitally and constantly involved in the daily lives of people who live in those places. So anyway, of course, the word animism comes from the word for soul, a Latin word that means soul. So it's the idea of spiritual presence, soulish presence in the world. Fascinating to study. Okay, so let's. Now, you guys, remember we didn't go through this. I threw it up there real quick. I'm going to pass by that. We did look at the issue of sin. I want to talk with you about this today. And I'm going to read this here. I don't normally like to just read stuff on the screen, but this is really good stuff. Notice it does come from the Honor Shame website, so you could dive into that more. What do honor shame cultures and wine have in common? They both have. Has anybody ever seen this word before? What does it look like? Terror, but it's really not. It actually comes from the word for earth, which in Portuguese is terra, T-E-R-R-A. Okay, and I looked it up. It's a word that has to do with. It's a French word, and I looked up the pronunciation. Not everybody online pronounces it the same, so I'm not sure. But terroir is one way of pronouncing it, and what it means is it's the taste of wine. As it's influenced by the ground and the climate and the surroundings where the vines grow. So the same The same kind of grapes, for example, can produce a different taste in different parts of the world because of ground conditions and climate conditions and things like that. And so the idea is that even though honor shame is a constant that we study, okay, when it comes out of different regions of the world, it actually expresses itself, it tastes different. That makes sense? So it's kind of a neat illustration that they use. By the way, I read something or heard something recently about those who are wine tasters, or professional wine tasters. You know, they'll taste wine, they don't even swallow it. You know, they'll taste it and then spit it out and rinse their mouth. And it's a very serious thing, and they make good money doing it. Honor shame cultures always have a unique flavor depending on the context. For example, East Asians respond to shame by withdrawing, whereas Mideasterners will defend their honor aggressively. Same principle, honor shame, but two completely different ways of responding to the violation of honor shame. The values of honor and shame lead to antithetical responses. Codes of honor and shame vary so widely that some scholars insist on using the plural honors, implying there is no singular, universally shared notion of honor or shame. Here is how I explain it. I'm not sure if this is Jason Georges that's writing this or one of his colleagues. Honor and shame are the foundational values of many cultures, but every culture expresses those values uniquely. Every culture has its own flavor, terroir, of honor and shame. You guys recognize this name, Alexis de Tocqueville? Who is he? You historians. Well, what was his ethnic background? Terroir. He's French, right? What about him?
Wasn't he a French anthropologist or something who came to this place and wrote a bunch about how we like culturally used to different from Britain?
Yeah, he did. He did. So here's what he said. You're right. He gave a different. He gave a different perspective. He said, what our fathers called the archetype of honor was in reality only one of its forms. He's talking about the American fathers. They gave a generic name to what was only a species. Honor is to be found, therefore, in democratic centuries as well as in aristocratic times. But it will not be hard to show that in the former it presents a different face. The English is a little ancient, a little antiquated, but that's the idea. So it'd be like somebody, referring to a dog as a dog, say, well, dogs are dogs. And you say, well, wait a minute, there are little miniature poodles and there are mastiffs, right? And why do I use dog as an illustration? Because we're in the middle of getting ready to get rid of 5 puppies that we have. This morning we got up, you'll love this. My wife decided to let them out in the bathroom while we were reading the Bible. Well, it turned out to be a mistake. We laughed afterwards. Fortunately, we have tile floor in our bathroom, and they did some finger painting, and they provided their own paint. And it started coming through the bottom of the door, and I said, honey, it smells really strong. And of course, I'm not going to get up and look. So she got up and looked, and so I should show you. Oh, this is.
Wait, what?
Huh? They pooped, and then they spread it all around the floor with their paws.
Yeah, but what are you showing?
No, I'm not going to show that. I'm going to show what happened after. Don't worry, I'm not.
Paint the elephant, so.
Well, you can't hardly see this, but here, just for fun. We put them in the bathtub, and after their baths, they all stood on the edge of the tub. And I sent this to my family on. Yeah, you want to buy a puppy? They're only $2,400.
Whoa.
It's pocket change for college students. So, you see, if I use the word dog, what comes to your mind if I say the word dog? Just generically. Now I've got you looking at these, but before this, if I just say the word dog, what comes to your mind? How many of you have had a dog? Okay, typically it's the dog that somebody has that comes to mind. And so that's the same thing. If I say honor shame, depending on where you are in the world, the particular breed of honor shame is going to come to mind. And so this guy, I think it's George's, he breaks down, I don't know why this isn't being more cooperative, but he breaks down global honor shame types like this. He makes 5 of them. Now you say, wait a minute, I thought the West wasn't honor shame. Well, don't forget that every place in the world contains some form, some degree of all 3 of these, right? So even though the West is primarily guilt innocence, there is an honor shame element. And by the way, that honor shame element is growing in our country. What makes it grow? Why would honor shame be growing more and more in our country, in the United States and in the West in general? There are a number of factors, James.
Globalization.
Yeah, globalization is one of them, and as we mentioned before, the West has the greater influence in globalization because of economics and stuff like that. What else? Globalization has more to do with what the West has contributed to the rest of the world. What about the converse of that? What's that?
Well, I was trying to think about say immigration too.
Immigration is really the converse of that, right? And along with immigration, the infiltration of Eastern religions especially into our country, which started back as early as the late 50s and 60s, on into the 1960s. And okay, so all of that has increased the influence of the honor shame idea in the West. Okay, anyway, these are the those are the way that he has that divided up. And it looks, it's pretty convincing. I don't see Antarctica on there anywhere. All right, so let's talk about these. Explanation of the 5 regions. So the Western shame tends to be more private and personal. It's an internal psychological emotion, often rooted in the fragmentation and alienation of modern life. Shame is not so much community scorn, though social media is bringing this aspect out more and more, but low self-esteem. I think it's interesting that he mentions social media, because social media is a collectivistic tool. You post something on Twitter, okay? Yeah, it's an individual post, but it has social ramifications, collectivistic ramifications, okay? Facebook, I mean, any of them, any of those platforms. But notice the emphasis on private, low self-esteem, okay? I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but what he's basically saying is that what we call low self-esteem actually, in his evaluation, is a form of shame, okay? But it's not a shame that's imposed from those outside, it's one that's self-imposed. That makes sense? You feel low self-esteem, it may just be your problem. Other people around you may think you're great, but you're wrestling with something inside that causes you to feel a sense of low self-esteem. That's not collectivistic shame. That's personal shame. It's interesting. Number 2, Latin notions of honor, at least for men, often depend on being macho. It's a big deal all over Latin America. In Brazil, they call it machismo. It's the same thing. It's the male, male dominance. Honor and shame are uniquely linked to race and economic class in South America. Okay, there's some spelling errors here, but we'll forgive them. Recall also that the countries of Southern Europe are Latin-based and so share some similarities. So honor shame in the Latin American culture is based more on race and economic class. And I did not realize that when I went to Brazil. I thought Brazilians, it's like, I was stereotypical in my thinking. I did a wedding around I'd been there less than a decade, and two of my seminary students who were getting married asked if I would do their wedding for them. And the fella was a little darker than the gal. She came from a little bit higher economic class than he did. And he was preparing to be a pastor. And I did not realize this until well into the counseling and getting ready for the wedding, that her family really opposed the wedding for a time. And I remember thinking, I don't hardly see the difference between these two. I mean, there was a slight difference in their coloration, but they saw it very clearly. And so it woke me up to the fact that even in a country where I would think that there's an amalgamation, that people are all kind of all one happy family, it just isn't so. There was a lot of racism even among those people. And so that plays a big role in Latin American culture. Number 3, Islamic culture highly esteems the Quran, Muhammad, the Ummah, which is the leader, kind of like the equivalent of a rabbi in Judaism, and even the Arabic language is symbolic representations of honor. Muslims feel personally disrespected if any of these are disgraced. Middle Eastern cultures tend to compete aggressively for honor, so they can feel justified using violence to defend their honor killings, terrorism. So we have to understand that when terrorism takes place, it's not just because people are bloodthirsty and they love killing, okay, or that they're demented or something like that. That can happen, but that is really not what's driving terrorism, and these movements in Islam, okay? They are convinced that intrusions into their culture are bringing shame, disgrace, dishonor to their people, and they have to act in their own way of thinking. They have to act to defend that. And how do you act? You act in such a way as to eliminate whatever it is that's causing that to happen. Now that's true in other cultures. Other cultures will also act in such a way as to eliminate. But in the Mideast culture, it's much more common for that action to involve injury and even death of a violation. Yeah.
Does that mean, when the terrorists came, they were thinking of their family then, or what they could do to save them?
Boy, I got to be careful because I'm going to speak stereotypically, but in general, they view the American way of life, capitalism, democracy, everything that's part of that, as a threat to their well-being and their way of life. Just like the Auca Indians, the Rwani Indians felt that the coming in of Elliot and his guys back in Ecuador were posing a threat. So even though it was a different scenario, the concept was still the same. They're posing a threat to our way of life. And so they reacted to defend that. Yeah. I'm not justifying what they do. I'm just saying that they're not just a bunch of crazy guys out there bloodthirsty trying to kill people, Same way with, look even in the New Testament, you have the Sicarii, right? And you have the Zealots. These are guys that were trying to get rid of the Romans. They viewed the Roman incursion into Israel as a threat to the Jewish way of life. And so they weren't out killing just because they love killing, but they were trying to defend and preserve the Jewish way of life. Yeah, interesting. 4, African cultures give a high value to ancestry and have a strong community orientation. Properly honoring the living dead is a crucial part of African religion and culture. Hey, Paul, here's a question for you. Because of the emphasis on ancestors and the extended family, are genealogies a big deal where you're from? Is it easy to do genealogical studies of your family background?
When you go through tribes, no, but not really.
Okay. I'm just curious. When I read that, I thought maybe that'd be the key. In Mormonism, the Mormons have one of the best databases for ancestry studies because of their view of, baptizing for the dead and that sort of thing. Okay, thank you. But a big deal. But again, in an African culture, if you commit an act of shame, you're not just shaming yourself, the low self-esteem, the West, and you're not just shaming those who are living around you, but you actually can bring shame on even the living dead, those who've gone before the ancestors. which can cause not only shame on their part, but also a very negative reaction, which could bring harm to you and your people. So it's very, very complex. And then Asian cultures, number 5, the notion of face is paramount. One can lose, keep, save, and gain face. People's response to shameful situations tends to be more passive in the Asian cultures as opposed to the Islamic cultures where it's more aggressive, okay, tends. Because shaming someone else brings shame upon oneself, hence the extreme politeness. So the way I treat somebody, I may be treating somebody very nicely because I don't want it to come back and kick me and bring shame upon myself. Now, is that true everywhere in Asia? No. You go to India, where the radical Hindus are very active right now. They're burning churches. They're hurting pastors. I know a pastor personally that had his leg broken, because of an invasion of radical Hindus. But that would not be a good general statement of the Asian culture and the way it deals with honor shame. Any questions or comments about this? There's so much packed into this, but any comments about any of these 5 that he's trying to explain? Yeah, Jules?
So, like in China, the Chinese where they just kind of hurt people and nobody cares. But do you think that's an honor shame thing? They think they're entitled to it, or do they think that's just their culture?
That's a good question. I'm not sure how to answer that. In a collectivistic culture like China, identity is something that you are born with. It's not something that you earn. And so in the Western culture, people will sometimes defend their turf because they've worked hard to get there. In a collectivistic culture, they may defend their turf because they've inherited that. They were born into that. And so it's assigned rather than acquired. Do you remember us talking about that in another class? Is your identity, your place in society something that is assigned to you by birth, or something that you acquire by working hard? So it's probably a mixture, Jules. I don't know. That's a really good question. Most of the time, the best way to answer to questions like that is, yeah, probably a little bit of both, or all the above. Yep, that's good. Any other comments about this or questions? I don't know about you, but the more I study this, the smaller I feel, and the more I feel like a kindergartner because of the complexity of all of this. There's so much here to think about. Okay, let's go on down. The above comments are obviously broad generalizations. Such simplifications will make some cringe, and rightfully so. I, the writer, lived in Central Asia for 9 years, where the culture is a unique amalgamation of Islamic, Asian, and Soviet notions of honor shame. Culture types are far more complex than the above map implies. I appreciate him clarifying that. The point here is simply this: honor shame has unique flavors. Terroir. Honor shame is not monolithic. What does monolithic mean? It's a word that's used in a lot of disciplines. Go ahead and look it up there, Justin, if you want to. What does monolithic mean? That's a good word for you to have in your... Got it?
Well, my definition says formed from a single large block or stone.
Uh-huh. Mono is one, lithos, Greek word actually for stone. So it's the idea that everything's cut out of the same stone. And that's what he's saying. That's not true about this. Honor shame is not all cut out of the same stone, but cut out of at least five different stones that he has recognized here. Yep. You can use monolithic about anything. It's not all. Sometimes we'll say, so-and-so's cut out of the same cloth. We'll use that analogy as well. Okay. So a more accurate depiction would break out of the thousands honor shame break out the thousands of honor shame flavors, I think. Oh my God, yeah. Would break out the thousands of honor shame flavors, but that becomes too unwieldy to be practically helpful. How would you explain the terroir of honor shame in your context? Okay. Miriam, in Germany, is the description of honor shame here in the Western world, does that sound a lot like Germany as well? Would you say it's similar? Yeah, I would. Western Europe in general would probably be more that way. Italy is sometimes set apart, but it's a lot more communal, collectivistic maybe than some of the others. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, let's go on to something a little different. Now, I'm not sure about the abbreviating verses like that, but I usually just put VS, but they put the geography of shame, east versus west. So now, what's he doing? He gave us 5 different categories, but now he's going to come back and deal with the main division, which is the east versus the west. Okay? And the east is sometimes also referred to as what? What's another way of classifying the east? Well, let's start with the west. That's the smaller group. What's the west consist of? Who's part of the west in general?
You got like the U.S., Canada, Australia.
Okay, and you can, yeah, you're right. In general, the grouping of the West, if you're going to simplify it to East and West, the West is North America, U.S. and Canada, and I know that geographically Mexico is included in North America, but not culturally. So it's North America, U.S. and Canada, and Western Europe. If you just remember those 2 things, North America, Western Europe, you've got the West. And again, you're right, Australia is part of the Anglo cluster that we talked about, right? So you could bring that in, but when you're simplifying it to this degree, East versus West, that's how it's done. Okay? North America, Western Europe. So the East is everybody else. But what are 2 other designations that we sometimes use when we refer to the East? Remember? The 2/3 world or the majority world, right. And most of that, in terms of actual population, is contained within the, what rectangle? 1040 window, right? You'll find more there than anywhere else. Yep. Okay. So when I teach, he says, on honor shame dynamics in ministry in the Bible, people often comment, you speak about shame in other cultures, but I think shame is a big issue here in America. Interesting. Westerners seem to feel decreasingly less guilt and more shame, probably due to postmodernism's deconstruction of rules. Now, that's one thing we didn't mention. We did talk about immigration coming in, okay, and globalization, but that's an interesting addition to the discussion. Deconstruction of rules. Our country, on some fronts, is actually becoming more of a particularist culture than a universalist culture. You see that even in you look at the moral revolution that's going on right now. Rules don't matter, right? There's only one rule, if you will, that really matters. And what is that rule in the moral revolution? What's the one undeniable rule that you have to keep? What's that?
Don't offend someone else, I guess.
Okay, yeah, that would be an extension of it. Yeah, don't offend somebody else. It's really autonomy. The rule is autonomy, right? It's all about me. Yeah, and of course, and when you say don't offend somebody else, they might say that without stopping to think that they're offending an entire Judeo-Christian culture out there that's totally against this. That doesn't matter. So it is becoming more of an issue. The deconstruction of rules. people are finding more reasons not to keep rules. Rules are sometimes associated, some people will associate rules with like a democratic legal system, and they don't, if you're opposed to that, even the interpretation of the Constitution of the United States, is a question of how literally you interpret what was written. So that is an influence in our culture now. Shame is indigenous to humanity. We all experience it. Shame is not an Asian or Eastern issue. Shame is an Adam and Eve issue. Well said. It's an issue of the race, the human race. Guilt and innocence may remain primary values in Western institutions, relationships, and theology, but shame plays a definite secondary role in our lives, though it takes a different form than in majority world cultures. I think the idea there, secondary role, is it's not as obvious in our culture, okay, but it definitely influences the way we live. Western shame is private and personal. Eastern shame is public and corporate. Remember, generalizations are always wrong, but usually helpful. Isn't it interesting how much we emphasize that? We were really, really trying to be sensitive. Western shame is centered on the individual, as is Western culture as a whole. We evaluate ourselves as worthless or unlovable. It's that lowest self-esteem idea. As I evaluate my own life and identity, I doubt my own being and worth. I don't think he's giving a testimony. He's saying I as a Western. That's the way the West thinks. Eastern shame is the result of others' negative evaluation. Western shame is about self-worth. Eastern shame is about public reputation. Now, I think this next phrase, this statement is really interesting for this reason. American shame is researched by psychologists. Why? What do psychologists study? Psychology is the study of what? Literally, it's the study of psychosukos, the soul. It's the inner person. So if you're going to study shame in the Western world, you got to look inside the person. Psychologists will be the ones to do that. They're going to study the inner workings of your mind, your soul, or whatever they call it, So they will be the ones. But Eastern shame has been the domain of social anthropologists. Why? Because shame is based more on the social implications and the social interpretation of who you are. So in the West, I decide who I am. I evaluate myself, or psychologists get inside of me. In the Eastern world, society decides who I am and how much I'm worth. Yeah. The opposite of Eastern shame is honor, others thinking highly of me. The opposite of Western shame is self-esteem. I feel good about myself. Isn't that fascinating? It's really, really something. Western shame is not very contagious. Others' reputation is not strongly attached to mine, as in Eastern shame. The seedbed of Eastern shame is a strong communal culture where the prying eyes of gossipy neighbors publicize my value. Thanks. Now, you guys are in a Bible college, okay? You're in a communal setting, if I can use that word, okay? It's not a commune. It's a communal setting. Thanks for helping out. There's a certain sense in which here at FBBC, in your relationships, okay, you actually may feel a little bit more of the Eastern version of shame than you do the Western version, just because you live in this, what some call bubble, okay, this communal setting. So the way that your roommates or the RA tends to look at you, and think of you has a great influence on your value here, or, whatever. Does that make sense? Just because you're in this setting right now, okay? There is a certain sense in which the FBBC culture is more of an Eastern form of honor shame than a Western form. Although that's not totally true. Okay, Western shame is not very contagious. Others' reputation is not strongly attached to mine, as in Eastern shame. The seedbed of Eastern shame, I already read that, I'm sorry, excuse me. But American shame stems from having minimal community, family or ethnic group around us. We have an existential identity from not knowing who we are. Okay, another Another definition. What does existential mean? We have an existential identity. What is existentialism? You guys have studied psychology, right? If you need to look it up and give me a definition. What is existential?
Well, the definition online, I don't think it's that helpful. It's relating to existence.
Okay, it is based on the word exist, okay? Doesn't help us a lot, but yeah, it's going back to the, so what does that mean? We have an existential identity in the West from not knowing who we are.
Is it kind of related to like an existential crisis, like you have an identity crisis?
Say that again, an existential crisis, yeah, but what does that mean?
An identity crisis, like you don't know who you are, or like you're not sure what stage of life you're supposed to be in.
Okay, and why is that? What makes that existential? That's what I'm trying to get at. You know, who am I? You know, I mean, the moral majority is full of existentialism. Am I male, female, right now, tomorrow, what will I be the next day? Do I do transgender, surgery? That's all chock full of existentialism. So what is existentialism? Keep looking. If you see something online, let me know. Coming up dry?
Mine says a philosophy that emphasizes the uniqueness and isolation of the individual experience in a hostile or indifferent universe, regards human existence as unexplainable, and stresses freedom of choice and responsibility for the consequences of one's actions.
Okay. Another word that helps us understand existentialism is the word experience. In other words, existentialism is not founded on unchanging principles, eternal truth, okay? It's based on the moment. It's based on who I am right now in relation to whatever's going on right now. So existentialism is a constantly moving standard. It's really not a standard at all. I mean, you can call it a standard, but it's constantly changing. So for instance, our country is 240 some years old. Okay, the Constitution was written way back at the beginning. An existential mindset would say we have got to reinterpret. We've got to. You'll hear people say that the Constitution is a living document. What are they saying by that? They're saying it has to be modified and updated. Okay, well, there's a certain element of truth in that. We're not talking politics here as a class, but the idea is there's nothing that is unchanging. Everything is constantly in flux, and therefore, who I am today may change, who I am tomorrow, because circumstances, experiences, all that's going to exchange. Existence is constantly on the move. That's the idea. And so why are people constantly struggling with suicidal thoughts and thoughts of depression and hopelessness? Because you have no anchor. Existentialism does not have, existentialism is attempting to pull the anchor up of everything that our country was founded on, our society. Okay, so now we're subject to the wind and the waves. It's like what was it, was it Jude that talked about giving into every wind of doctrine? Was that Jude? Yeah, that's the idea. When there's no anchor, there's no foundation. Nobody knows. Security is out the window. That's the idea. And so now it's all about me trying to protect myself and understand who I am. Okay. American shame stems from having minimal. Okay, we have existential identity. Western shame says, I'm not known. Eastern shame says, I'm too known. Okay? So in Western in Western shame, I'm feeling something, and I feel very much alone because people don't understand me. They don't know who I am. And that brings personal shame. In the Eastern culture, it's people know me too well, or and I become a product of whatever they think as a community that I am. All right. One unique result of social media is that people, not just companies or products, are now brands. People turn to social media to create face, project a likable image, and make friends. The whole idea of friending somebody on Facebook is very interesting. These are hollow exercises in shame reduction. Social media, I suspect, helps mask shame because you can portray yourself however you want. Though great for communication, social media does not remedy shame. Bullying, the contemporary technique for shaming, increasingly occurs on social media as people are ridiculed in comments and hashtags. As we chisel our public brand with tweets, the persistent awareness that our public brand is not the real me can breed further shame. In other words, I want to project myself in a certain image of myself online or on social media, however I do it, but I know deep down inside that that's not the real me and nobody else out there really knows who I am. See? We all need salvation from shame, whoever we are, wherever we live. And praise the Lord, we sit here knowing that salvation comes from Christ. Christ gives us our identity. He gives us a rock. He gives us an unchanging pattern of truth to live by. He resolves all these things that the Western idea of shame brings. So, interesting. Just a fascinating set of articles. And if you go on the Honor Shame website, there's more about it on there. I may touch on some of this on Thursday. I wanted to talk a little bit about the narrative story emphasis, but we'll see. I'll take a look here and decide. But there's some more good stuff on here. All right, enough for today. Thank you all.